Good evening from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 6:13 p.m. on the 3rd of March 2025. Also happens to be the anniversary of my father's death back in 2017, so he was basically murdered by the state of Victoria, so even though he wasn't a good father to me, he was still my blood, and I still kind of see the rage about that, how they didn't take him in a timely manner to a hospital with kidney sepsis and basically caused his death. Mind you, he was 3 days shy of turning 89, so I suppose you could look at it that he had a good innings, but not being murdered by his own government, he might have had a good few more years beyond that. And just doesn't know, does one? Anyway, I'm not very well. So I don't know where I caught a lurgy, but it's already going to my chest. Didn't take very long. And I was perfectly fine and healthy when I went out Friday night, although I did have a lot of anxiety that day, but I suspect I caught it when I was out dancing. And, you know, this COVID thing, there's no point being angry or upset about it because people can be asymptomatic, not know they've got it. So it's just one of those things. I haven't bothered to test, but I can tell by the way it's hovering around my meridians that it's likely to be COVID rather than an ordinary garden variety flu, which usually goes straight for the chest and don't muck around. So it's a weird illness. Anyway, I find myself this evening not too shabby really, not too bad. I mean, a bit weak, a bit dizzy, and a mild headache, but nothing to be too alarmed about. So I thought I'd read my usual stories for as long as I have the energy and the breath, mind you. So if I stop abruptly, it's because it's just too much for me and I have to guard my health for as long as possible, given there's no one else to look after me or protect me. But I feel like reading, and it's a good way to pass the time. So today's story is called How the Bee Became. Now in the middle of the earth lived a demon. This demon spent all his time groping about in the dark tunnels, searching for precious metals and gems. He was hunchbacked and knobbly armed, his ears draped over his shoulders like a wrinkly cloak. These kept him safe from the bits of rock that were always falling from the ceilings of his caves. He had only one eye, which was a fire. To keep this fire alive, he had to feed it with gold and silver. I honestly didn't know what this next story was going to be about, but isn't that funny, since I'm a self-teaching silversmith? Very funny indeed. Synchronicities, people of Earth. Pay attention to all synchronicities. I've had angel numbers all day too. By that I mean 1111, 111. So I've been quietly observing the shenanigans from the spirit world. Wonder what they're up to. We've got a massive big Cyclone Alfred, about to make landfall in the next, I don't know, day or two. I'm not sure when, but it's coming much further south than it usually does, so it's posing a very great threat. So I've been out putting all my lanterns and loose bits and pieces away, and I just hope I've got everything that needs to be put away in time, because I'm really not well enough to be running around the garden gasping for air, preparing for an epic cyclone. But anyway, people of Earth. Over this eye, he cooked his supper every night. It's hard to say what he ate. Imagine eating something that you cooked in your own eye. Sounds a bit gross to me. All kinds of fungus that grew in the airless dark on the rocks. His drink was mostly tar and oil, which he loved. There is no end of tar and oil in the middle of the earth. He rarely came up to the light. Once, when he did, he saw the creatures that God was making. Must have been a long time ago. God was still creating creatures, sentient beings, rocks and waterfalls and stars. It must have been fun to be God when he was in that initial creation process. It must have been great fun seeing what came out of his imagination. Animals with 2 long necks, and other animals that lie in tree and hang about doing nothing all day. Sloths and koalas that eat eucalyptus leaves and look very cute, but have got very, very long claws. Imagine imagining all that up. But everything has its reason. Koalas need long claws so they can grip and climb trees. Anyway, where were we? Distracted by creating. It's fun to create. It's great fun, even for us mere mortals. "What's this?" he cried when a grasshopper landed on his clawed, horny foot. Then he saw lion, then cobra, then far above him, eagle. Had to take my eagle feather out and my plait out because I had to wash my hair. It's not being well and being weak makes my hair limp and oily, and I don't know, people of Earth. I don't know what's going on with me. But every day in every way, I carry on living my best life for no other reason than to piss off my enemies. "My word," he said, and hurried back down into his dark caves to think about what he had seen. He was jealous of the beautiful things that God was making. Why would you be jealous? Why couldn't you just join in and delight in it and dance with all the beautiful things and embrace the beautiful things and share life with the beautiful things? Anyway, "I will make something," he said at last, "which will be far more beautiful than any of God's creatures." But he had no idea how to set about it. So one day he crept up to God's workshop and watched God at work. He peeked from behind the door. He saw him model the clay, bake it in the sun's fire, then breathe life into it. So that was it. Away he dived back down into the centre of the earth. At the centre of the earth, it was too hot for clay. Everything was already baked hard. He set about trying to make his own clay. First he ground up stones between his palms. That was powder, but how was he to make it into clay? He needed water, and there in the centre of the earth, it was too hot for water. He searched and he searched, but there was none. At last he sat down. He felt so sad he began to cry. Big tears rolled down his nose. If only I had water, he sobbed. This clay could become a real living creature. Why do I have to live where there is no water? He looked at the powder in his palm and began to cry afresh. As he looked and wept and looked and wept, a tear fell off the end of his nose straight into the powder. But he was too late. A demon's tears are no ordinary tears. There was a red flash, a fizz, a bubbling, and where the powder had been was nothing but a dark stain on his palm. He felt like weeping again. Now he had water, but no powder. So much for stone powder, he said. I need something stronger. Then quickly, before his tears dried, he ground some of the precious metal that he had used to feed the fire of his eye. As soon as it was powder, he wetted it with a tear off his cheek. But it was no better than the stone powder had been. There was a flash, a buzz, a bubbling, and nothing. Well, he said, what now? At last he thought of it. He would make a powder of precious gems. It was hard work grinding these, but at last he had finished. Now for a tear. But he was too excited to cry. He struggled to bring up a single tear. It was no good. His eye was dry as an oven. He struggled and he struggled. Nothing. All at once he sat down and burst into tears. It's no good, he cried. I can't cry. Then he felt his tears wet on his cheeks. I'm crying, he cried joyfully. Quick, quick. And he splashed a tear onto the powder of the precious gems. The result was perfect. He had made a tiny piece of beautiful clay. Only tiny because his tears had been few. But it was big enough. Now, he said, what kind of creature shall I make? The jewel clay was very hard to work into shape. It was tough as red-hot iron. So he laid the clay on his anvil and began to beat it into shape with his great hammer. He bet and bet and bet that clay for 1,000 years. Sounds a bit like me when I started my silversmithing journey. Wasn't 1,000 years, but sometimes with all the anxiety and angst, it felt like it. By the gods. And at last it was shaped. And now it needed baking. Very carefully, because the thing he had made was very frail. He put it into the fire of his eye to bake. Then beside a great heap of small pieces of gold and silver. For another 1,000 years he sat, feeding the fire of his eye with the precious metal. All this time, in the depths of his eye, glowed his little creature, baking slowly. At last, it was baked. Now came the real problem. How was he going to breathe life into it? He puffed and he blew, but it was no good. "It is so beautiful," he cried. "I must give it life." It certainly was beautiful. All the precious gems of which it was made mingled their colours, and from the flames in which it had been baked it had taken a dark fire. It gleamed and flashed, red, blue, orange, green, purple, no bigger than your fingernail. Sounds a bit like an opal, doesn't it? But it had no life. There was only one thing to do. He must go to God and ask him to breathe life into it. When God saw the demon, he was amazed. He had no idea that such a creature existed. "Who are you?" he asked. "Where have you come from?" The demon hung his head. Now he thought, "I will use a trick." "I'm a jewel smith," he said humbly, "and I live in the centre of the earth. I have brought you a present to show my respect for you." He showed God the little creature that he had made. God was amazed again. I'm just going to turn my TV off. I forgot that I had it. Come on. I do this dance all the time. It doesn't quite turn off properly anymore.
You haven't shopped around until you tried Yui.
Right, I can dance, baby. Right. Yes, even my TV is rebellious. Everything in this house fights me day and night, but I see the funny side of it. What can you do? I put new batteries in the remote, so it should be working properly now. Still plays shenanigans. It's quite bizarre. Anyway. He showed God the little creature that he had made. God was amazed again. "How beautiful," he kept saying as he turned it over and over on his hand. "How beautiful! What a wonderfully clever smith you are." Excuse me. "Ah," said the demon, "but not so clever as you. I could never breathe life into it. If you had made it, it would be alive. As it is beautiful, but dead." God was flattered. "That soon altered," he said. He raised the demon's gift to his lips and breathed life into it. Then he held it out. It crawled onto the end of his finger. Buzz it went and whirred its thin, beautiful wings. Like a flash, the demon snatched it from God's fingertip and plunged back down into the centre of the earth, which is not a very good place for such a creature to live, by the way. They're sunshine creatures. They belong on the outside. But shh! I mustn't ruin the story. There for another 1,000 years he lay, letting the little creature crawl over his fingers and make short flights from one hand to the other. It glittered all its colours and the light of his eyes fire. The demon was very happy. Well, you wouldn't want a sad and upset and angry demon, would you? Yin and yang and the multiverse, people of Earth. Yin and fucking yang. Just say. You are more beautiful than any of God's creatures, he crooned. But life was hard for the little creature down in the centre of the earth, with no one to play with but the demon. He had God's breath in him, and he longed to be among the other creatures under the sun. Just what I said earlier. And he was sad for another reason. In his veins ran not blood, but the tears with which the demon had mixed his clay. And what is sadder than a tear? Feeling the sadness in all his veins, he moved restlessly over the demon's hands. One day the demon went up to the light to compare his little creature with the ones God had made. Buzz went his pet and was away over a mountain. Come back, roared the demon, then quickly covered his mouth with his hands, frightened that God would hear him. He began to search for his creature, but soon, frightened that God would see him, he crept back into the earth. Still, his little creature was not happy. The sadness of the demon's tears was always in him. It was part of him. It was what flowed in his veins, i.e. complex PTSD, generalised anxiety, and major depression, which I had to fight back from over the last 6 decades. So if you ever see me truly happy and rejoicing, be happy for me. I've earned the right and privilege to truly be happy at this late phase of my life by the gods, with harm to none and competition with none. So it is done. If I gather everything that is sweet and bright and happy, he said to himself, that should make me feel better. Here there are plenty of wonderfully sweet, bright, happy things. And he began to fly from flower to flower, collecting the bright sunny sweetness out of their cups. Ah, he cried, wonderful. The sweetness lit up his body. He felt the sun glowing through him from what he drank. For the first time in his life, he felt happy. But the moment he stopped drinking from the flowers, the sadness came creeping back along his veins, and the gloom into his thoughts. My dear goddess, my friend's freaking out because we do have a major cyclone coming. The shops are selling out fast without any excuse for those sheep to just panic buy. They're just morons. Fill bath with water. Yeah, that's not a silly idea. Alrighty, have a working torch. See how I'm loved and protected by my beautiful friends. They mother me like I'm a child sometimes. Sometimes I arc up about it too. Don't like being smothered too much, but it is a legit thing to be worried about right now. Very, very serious. The worst is, of course, if the water gets cut off and there's major flooding. So I have to go and scrub the bath out, fill it with water. Oh, it's all a bit of a drag, isn't it? And I actually don't feel well, so it's very bad timing to come down with a lurgy right now, but I've been pushing myself for weeks, driving myself very hard, even when I did this injury. And quite frankly, I'm lucky I didn't get septic shock with that or anything really nasty. I hope that's not what I've got wrong with me. No, I don't think so, because I've been in a lot of pain with the arm. But anyway, it's all a bit odd, people of Earth, what's been going on with me. Very, very odd. But every day, in every way, I just keep living my best life and soldiering on. Right, where were we? Yes, he was collecting bright sunny sweetness out of the flower cups, which is called nectar or pollen. Pollen, I think, or both. I'm not sure. Isn't bees collect pollen and drink the nectar? Anyway. Ah, he cried. Wonderful. The sweetness lit up his body. He felt the sun glowing through him from what he drank. For the first time in his life, he felt happy. I remember the first time I felt happy too. Some bubble burst in my psyche, and it was in 2009. I can't remember the exact month, but I thought I'd gone completely bonkers. I couldn't stop laughing and telling really off-colour weird jokes about my childhood and my husband and my former boyfriends up until that time. Oh, I sat at McDonald's with my daughter and her best friend and my friend Jared, and someone else was there. I can't remember who the other person was. And I laughed and laughed. There were tears pouring down my face. And other people at McDonald's were staring at me in some kind of horror because they'd never seen anyone have kind of a CPTSD manic episode before. It was a kind of a hypomania. And I couldn't stop. I went home and I laughed and I laughed. I kept laughing. So the next day I made an appointment for my elderly psychiatrist who was nearly 80. And I said, I can say his name now because he's probably dead now. Wherever my notes went will be long time archived, so you can't get any dirt on me. But there is no dirt on me apart from mental health issues and other people's evils. So anyway, I said, Dr. Eastwell, I said, I've come in. I'm very concerned about my mental health. What's wrong, Tanya, looking equally concerned? Have you had a breakdown, Tanya? Yes, I said, but it's a very strange kind of breakdown, something I've never experienced before. Whatever do you mean, Tanya? He was very indulgent and sweet to me. He was like, if you're going to have transference with your elderly psychiatrist, which is not, you're not supposed to have transference, you're supposed to pull that into line, people of Earth, but we just had a little mild bit of transference, which we both kind of allowed because I had nothing. No love in my life at that time. Nothing. Just monstrosities upon monstrosities upon monstrosities. I mean, I was with my ex Courtney at the time, but that relationship was already unravelling and going rancid and life-threatening and dangerous, since he was getting his friends to threaten me with samurai swords. So anyway, somehow on this particular date, it'll be in my diary somewhere, I can probably find the exact date, but it doesn't matter now. I have a feeling it was midway through the year in the winter months. Anyway, I said to him, "This breakdown I'm having, doctor." "Yes, yes, tell me about it. What precipitated it?" I said, "I honestly don't know. But just randomly, the other day, one afternoon, I'm at McDonald's with my kids and, their friends and one of my best friends, which is my brother Jared, my adopted brother Jared. And anyway, I said, and I couldn't stop laughing and I was happy. I've never been so happy in my life. Not even at Christmas or birthdays, not even when I got married. I said, I think the happiest I could compare it to was the joy I felt when I gave birth to Jasmine, which was a fucking awful, difficult birth. But somehow I felt great joy when she manifested out of me. I said, that's the closest thing I've ever felt to joy in my life. But this event, I said, was odd. I said, I couldn't stop laughing. I was crying with laughter. I was waiting for someone to call an ambulance and take me to the psych ward. And he looked at me very patiently and sagely from behind his desk. He was a beautiful soul, wonderful man. Much love to you, Don Eastwell, wherever you are, my darling. And he looked at me and he said, Tanya, you just be happy for as long as it takes. Don't worry what anyone else thinks of you. Don't worry about anyone judging you. If they take you to hospital, it's going to be a bit weird taking you to hospital for being happy. I went, yes, but it's, they'll think it's a manic episode and they'll drug me out of my skull and turn me into a zombie, which is a very real fear that I lived with a lot back in the day. No, Tanya, he said. This country, this society pathologizes happiness. It crushes happiness. And you're quite right. If you're too happy, it medicates the happiness right out from under you. He said, so you do have to be conscious that you don't go too far with it. Just keep some kind of equilibrium. He said, but Tanya, you deserve to be at long last, perhaps for the first time in your life, truly joyous and happy. And I encourage you to go forth and continuously strive for that wonderful euphoric feeling. If you can just somehow manifest it either by dancing or by creativity or by being in service and kindness to others, or however you manifest it, Tanya, he said. In my professional opinion, be happy, no matter what, no matter who. I looked at him and I almost burst into tears. I said, who would ever have thought that the first time I finally got truly, astonishingly, out of left field, out of the blue, happy, that I thought that my mind had completely broken. He said, no, Tanya, you've just burst a bubble in your psyche. It might take a while, but it's onwards and upwards from here on in. He said, I have every confidence in you. And he was a darling, that elderly doctor, but the problem was that the following year my mother died, and then the will dispute came out, and all that ugliness that went for 2.5 years that I almost suicided over on several occasions. All that little bit of happiness I had just started to experience was torn from me by my mother's death. And so it kind of went on for a few years. I would build myself up and start to feel okay again and think I can live life fully again and experience life in a state of bliss and joy again. And then some of that fucking awful evil would happen. I won't go into details what they all were, but it was bang, 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 from the time my mother died on the 7th of March 2010. It went on really right up until recent years. Slammed every which way. But anyway, so I often think about that wonderful doctor telling me, choose to be happy. And it is a choice. You can choose to be happy. Sometimes you kind of have to fake it till you make it, although I don't believe in being superficial and inauthentic. So sometimes when I feel grumpy or aggrieved about something, I let all that out too, because there's nothing worse than holding on to toxic, dead, destructive, soul-eating energy. You've just got to express yourself, not repress yourself. Anyway, where were we? The bee, for we believe he was a bee, for the first time in his life, was happy with the sunshine glowing through him from what he drank. Sunshine is a great healer. Vitamin D, people, and no doubt activates other phytochemicals in our bodies too. Is that the right word? Well, you know what I mean. Here comes the sun, here comes the sun, and I say, it's all right. Well, tomorrow it's going to be stormy and rainy, I think. Or perhaps the day after. But that's all right too. Everything in its season. And storms and they make me very, very powerful indeed. Good magic happens when there's a powerful storm. I'll be making very good use of it, just saying. But anyway, depending on how my chest goes, because if I feel woeful, I'm not going to be doing anything but resting in bed. Anyway, the highest form of magic there is love and happiness and joy that is real and authentic and manufactured or manifested by your own soul. And no one, no enemy, no government department, no globalist, no psychiatrist, no one can take that away from you when you know how to tap into your own innate soul and your own innate joy. Although, like I said, when it happened to me, it happened quite spontaneously and unexpectedly. It even took me by surprise. It was a great and powerful healing, actually. Sometimes I would sit back in the dark times of the Royal Dispute and just meditate on what it felt like to be so happy and so free and so joyful and have no cares or worries in the world, and with my dark sense of humour laughing about all the absolute fucking horror, of which there was many since birth, but the fact that I reached the point that I could turn it into some kind of tragic, comedic, almost comedy routine, which was just tripping off my tongue very spontaneously and naturally. I probably couldn't repeat that again if you paid me, but it was just so amazing and funny. Even my daughter's friend Ashley looked at me and she was like, what the fuck, Tanya? What the fuck? I don't think these are appropriate stories for McDonald's. And I was like, we're all adults here. And even she one time threw it in my face later and said, do you remember that time we were at McDonald's and you burst a bubble in your psyche? I said, I know. Oh, wasn't that cool? Don't think I want to do it again, but it was pretty full on. Anyway. But the moment he stopped drinking from the flowers, the sadness came creeping back along his veins and the gloom into his thoughts. That demon made me of tears, he said. How can I ever hope to get away from the sadness of tears unless I never leave these flowers? And he hurried from flower to flower. He could never stop, and it was too good to stop. Soon he had drunk so much, the sweetness began to ooze out of his pores. He was so full of it, he was brimming over with it, and every second he drank more. At last he had to pause. I must store all this somewhere, he said. So he made a hive, and all the sweetness that oozed from him he stored in that hive. Man found it and called it honey. God saw what the little creature was doing and blessed him and called him bee. But bee must still go from flower to flower, seeking sweetness. The tears of the demon are still in his veins, ready to make him gloomy the moment he stops drinking from the flowers. When he is angry and stings, the smart of his sting is the tear of the demon. If he has to keep that sweet, it is no wonder that he drinks sweetness until he brims over indeed. How the cat became. I'm getting cold from the air conditioning. I'll just turn that off for a little while. Hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. Oh dear goodness. How the cat became. Things were running very smoothly, and most of the creatures were highly pleased with themselves. Lion was already famous. Even the little shrews and moles and spiders were pretty well known. But among all these busy creatures there was one who seemed to be getting nowhere. It was Cat. Cat was a real oddity. The others didn't know what to make of him at all. He lived in a hollow tree in the wood. Every night, when the rest of the creatures were sound asleep, he retired to the depths of his tree. Then such sounds, pardon me, such screechings, yowlings, wailings. The bats that slept upside down all day long in the hollows of the tree branches awoke with a start and fled with their wingtips stuffed into their ears. It seemed to them that Cat was having the worst nightmares ever, 10 at a time. But no, Cat was tuning his violin. If only you could have seen him. Curled in the warm, smooth hollow of his tree, gazing up through the hole at the top of the trunk, smiling at the stars, winking at the moon, his violin tucked under his chin. Ah, Cat was a happy one. And all night long he sat there composing his tunes. Now the creatures didn't like this at all. They saw no use in his music. It made no food. It built no nest. It didn't even keep him warm. And the way Cat lounged around all day, sleeping in the sun, was just more than they could stand. He's a bad example, said Beaver. He never does a stroke of work. What if our children think they can live as idly as he does?" "It's time," said Weasel, "that Cat had a job like everybody else in the world." So the creatures of the wood formed a committee to persuade Cat to take a job. Jay, Magpie, and and Parrot went along at dawn and sat in the topmost twigs of Cat's old tree. As soon as Cat poked his head out, they all began together. "You've got to get a job, get a job, get a job." That was only the beginning of it. All day long, everywhere he went, those birds were at him. "Get a job, get a job." And try as he would, Cat could not get one wink of sleep. That night he went back to his tree early. He was far too tired to practice on his violin and fell fast asleep in a few minutes. Next morning, when he poked his head out of the tree at first light, the 3 birds of the committee were there again, loud as ever. "Get a job!" Cat ducked back down into his tree and began to think. He wasn't going to start grubbing around in the wet woods all day as they wanted him to. Oh no, he wouldn't have any time to play his violin if he did that. There was only one thing to do, and he did it. He tucked his violin under his arm and suddenly jumped out at the top of the tree and set off through the woods at a run. Behind him, shouting and calling, came Jay, Magpie, and Parrot. Other creatures that were about their daily work in the undergrowth looked up when Cat ran past. No one had ever seen Cat run before. "Cat's up to something," they called to each other. "Maybe he's going to get a job at last." And here he is. Happily playing violin in the tree, which is a kind of a occupation. I have friends who are musicians who get paid rather well for their music, I would think. I don't know what they get paid because I never asked, it's not my business, but they're all professional musicians, they all earn their living by it. So, jobs or vocations don't have to be boring, ordinary, grudging, drudgery, 9-to-5 jobs. They can be all kinds of things. Something to think about, isn't it? Deer, wild boar, bear, ferret, mongoose, porcupine, and a cloud of birds set off after Cat to see where he was going. Hang on a minute, did I read that correctly? Oh, yes, I did read that. Sorry, I've got a bit of a headache, so I'm starting to flounder a bit. Anyway, we'll finish this story off and then we'll quit for the day, for the evening, I mean. After a great deal of running, they came to the edge of the forest. There they stopped. As they peered through the leaves, they looked sideways at each other and trembled. Ahead of them, across an open field covered with haycocks, was a man's farm. But Cat wasn't afraid. He went straight on, over the field, and up to Man's door. He raised his paw and banged as hard as he could in the middle of the door. Man was so surprised to see Cat that at first he just stood eyes wide, mouth open. No creature ever dared to come onto his fields, let alone knock at his door. Cat spoke first. "I've come for a job," he said. "A job?" asked Man, hardly able to believe his ears. "Work," said Cat. "I want to earn my living." Man looked him up and down, then saw his long claws. "You look as if you'd make a fine rat catcher," said Man. Cat was surprised to hear that. He wondered what it was about him that made him look like a rat catcher. Still, he wasn't going to miss the chance of a job. So he stuck out his chest and said, "Been doing it for years." "Well then, I've a job for you," said Man. "My farm's swarming with rats and mice. They're in my haystacks, they're in my corn sacks, and they're all over the pantry." So before Cat knew where he was, he had been signed on as a rat and mouse catcher. His pay was milk and meat and a place at the fireside. He slept all day and worked all night. At first he had a terrible time. The rats pulled his tail, the mice nipped his ears. They climbed onto the rafters above him and dropped down, thump, onto him in the dark. They teased the life out of him. But Cat was a quick learner. At the end of the week, he could lay out a dozen rats and twice as many mice within half an hour. If he'd gone on laying them out all night, there would pretty soon have been none left, and Cat would have been out of a job. So he just caught a few each night, in the first 10 minutes or so. Then he retired into the barn and played his violin till morning. This was just the job he had been looking for. I actually know people like that. It's quite delightful. Man was delighted with him, and Mrs. Man thought he was beautiful. She took him onto her lap and stroked him for hours on end. What a life, thought Cat. If only those silly creatures in the dripping wet woods could see him now. Well, when the other farmers saw what a fine rat and mouse catcher Cat was, they all wanted cats too. Soon there were so many cats that our cat decided to form a string band. Oh yes, they were all great violinists. Every night, after making one pile of rats and another of mice, each cat left his farm and was away over the fields to a little dark spinney, then watched tunes all night long. Pretty soon, lady cats began to arrive. Now, every night, instead of just music, there was dancing too. And what dances! If only you could have crept up there and peeped into the glade from behind a tree and seen the cats dancing, the glossy furred ladies and the tomcats, some pearly grey, some ginger red, and all with wonderful green flashing eyes. Up and down the glade with the music, flying out all over the night. At dawn, they hung their violins in the larch trees, dashed back to the farms and pretended they had been working all night among the rats and mice. They lapped their milk hungrily, stretched out at the fireside, and fell asleep with smiles on their faces. The end. So, yes, only 2 stories today. Oh no, but wait a minute. We're nearly through book 1. There's 2 more stories to go. Shall I keep going or shall I quit while I'm ahead, babies? I think I better quit while I'm ahead. I don't want to get even more sick than I'm already brewing right now. Fending it off, kind of homeostasis. I'm healing, I'm healthy, I'm healed to the 10th generation before me, and I return all negativity and evil back to its original source. King bang boom, babies. But this current little illness I could have picked up. I haven't been anywhere except the club, so I suspect I caught it at the club, but I might have just caught a chill. I could have caught it anywhere. It is what it is, people of Earth. But anyway, hopefully I don't get too ill because I don't have any faith in our Queensland hospital system. Even though the Mater promised they would look after me if I get frail and vulnerable. That was one lovely nurse, and you don't know what other monsters might be waiting for you if you get desperately ill. So it's a very real concern, people of Earth, unfortunately, in our post-COVIDian epoch. It's very, very frightening. Like a bolt of lightning, very, very frightening. Scaramouche, scaramouche, moosh, do the fandango. Maybe I'll put on music and dance and drive the demon illness out of me that way. Babies. Anyway, probably not today though. I'll have to make sure I'm well and truly, got lung capacity before I dance again. Alright, anyway, it's not anything too serious at this current point in time. I'm soldiering on and might go and watch a bit of, television. Mind you, I never watch the news or any of those kind of shows. I just watch Netflix or Prime shows that I want to enjoy. And so it's good that Lynn sent me the news update to fill the bath up with water because I forgot about that actually. Alright, if you're in Brisbane or the New South Wales or Queensland, anywhere else in Queensland, especially if you're on the coast, I pray that we are all kept safe and that there's no massive damage done, no massive flooding, and sending positive energy and prayers out that Cyclone Alfred does an about turn and goes back out to sea. Sometimes they do that, if enough people put that energy into driving it away. So much love to all, and I'll be back probably tomorrow or the next day. However, I'm travelling with my current little illness. It says here it'll be rain on Wednesday, so that's 2 days from now. So all good, people of Earth. We actually need rain. My garden's nearly dried out. I might actually have to water tomorrow a little bit because it's parched. So anyway, bye for now. Stay safe. Stay happy, even if you have to manifest it from deep within your soul and freak out your elderly psychiatrist if you had one. Oh, he was a lovely man. And yeah, love the ones who love you back authentically and truly and deeply and honouringly, and wave goodbye to the rest. Bye for now, my darlings. Take good care. Be of good cheer.